Welcome to Centered. My name is Zach, and I am the Director of Spiritual Formation for One Life Church. And we're glad you're here. We're excited to get to share the next few weeks with you. In ancient Athens, there was a place called the Agora. And more than just a location or a building, the Agora represented an idea that people could come together with mutual respect and for mutual benefit and help each other kind of discuss the most meaningful, important questions in life. From the stairs of the Agora, you could hear Socrates and Plato. You could hear their voices ring out into the streets. It was a place that stretched people. And today, it seems like that place is disappearing more and more. You know, with social media, it seems like all that we hear or see is either our own mirrored position or like the very biting polar opposite view. And so we want to kind of create a space for that middle ground, for a place where we can, again, just like the Agora, with mutual benefit and mutual respect, discuss some of the most meaningful and important questions of life. And so we hope that you'll join us in that. And in light of just mutual respect and mutual benefit, we want to be upfront with you about a few things. First, just one of the things you need to know, you'll hear over and over again, is this idea of worldview. And our working definition of worldview is, at least the bare bones definition, the most simple one that we use is what you believe about the most meaningful, important questions of life. So how you would answer that sort of points to your worldview. And then in light of our openness, wanting to be open, we are going to be presenting the Christ-centered worldview's answer to all of these questions that we're going to be addressing. And so even if you're not a Jesus follower, if you're just exploring, we think this would be great for you because we at least want to present an accurate picture of what the Christ-centered worldview says, and not just the general caricature that culture sort of throws at us. And then also, right along with that, we will be presenting other worldviews as well. And we try to be fair, we try to be balanced. But if we have any missteps in that, we would just ask for grace. And then, again, we just hope you engage. We hope you are willing to debate with us. You don't have to agree with everything we say. We're not looking to indoctrinate. We're simply looking to start a discussion. And so with that, one of the things that we want to get right off the bat, this class was designed to be more of a class in person with discussion. And obviously, you are watching either in a small group, or by yourself, doing kind of on-demand style. And so we still want you to be able to engage. Even if you're watching by yourself, we have a message board, and we're actually going to put on the screen right now just a real quick way to show you how to get to the message board. And each week, we'll ask a few questions where you can go to the message board and post, and that's going to be living and dynamic, kind of forever. So you can post, you can come back and visit, see what other people have said, and all of that. So before getting into this week, just want to give you a quick breakdown of all the weeks, and we're going to throw them up on the screen, and we're also going to give you your first kind of message board task. So here is a quick breakdown of all the weeks. Week 1, which is what we're in right now, it will be a little different because we're just sort of setting the stage for everything else. Today we're just talking about the nature of belief, why we believe the things we do, kind of what's this deal with worldview and all that. Week 2 will be where did it all come from? Week 3, who are we? Humans are we? Do we have purpose and meaning? Are we accidental? Are we merely animals? A little more highly evolved? What's the story there? Week 4 is what's wrong with the world. Every worldview has an answer to that question. Week 5, who is Jesus? Again, we'll present the Christ-centered perspective, but also every worldview addresses Jesus in some way or another. So we'll explore that. Week 6, what's the cure? And finally, week 7, is there hope? And so just to sort of prime discussion here and to get you used to the message board, you can pause right now. You can go to the message board and just type in and answer which of these topics, without any context, kind of piques your interest the most. Which are you most excited to hear about or discuss or just to learn a little more or spend some time with? So go answer that, and then we'll move on. So each week, we are going to sort of start the day, the lesson, with a short film that our creative arts team has created. And so today, right now, we'll go and watch The Nature of Belief. As you kind of watch this film, in your participant guide, which I didn't mention just a minute ago, but yes, on the same place where you access this video, there should be a PDF or something, a way to download the participant guide. In there's a lot of information, stuff you can fill out. And one of the first things you'll see on there is film notes. And so as we watch the film, just make notes of things that either hit you, things you disagree with, things you have more questions about. But yeah, as you watch the film, just make notes there, and then we'll come back and discuss.
You could say the way we experience life is along two tracks. One track is the world that we see, taste, touch, smell, experience, and explore. The world of the almost unimaginable number and variety of things. Natural things, mountains, rivers, grass, moose, flowers, strawberries, canyons, rams, really high cliffs, cicadas, ants, elk. One of these things, snow, you get the idea. Add to that, there's all the things that we've learned to make out of the natural things we see, like Pez dispensers or Cheetos. That's the first track. Then there's the other track. That's how we respond to the things on the first track. This is the world of the unseen, our thoughts, our beliefs, our perceptions of the world, what we conclude about life from looking at the things around us. All this stuff we're surrounded by inspires deeper questions. The first and most obvious is, where did it all come from? Why is all of this here? Philosophers have long discussed the question, why is there something rather than nothing? And most of us have wondered, is all this stuff here for a reason? Did someone or something mean for it all to be here, or did it just come into existence on its own? What about us, humans? We're nothing if not self-reflective. We are the ones who are looking at all the things and asking questions like, where did it all come from? Then we look at ourselves and wonder, who are we? Are we special? Mark Twain put it, the two most important days in your life are the day you're born and the day you find out why. Are we accidental? Are we just animals with better fashion sense who enjoy games and texting and watching TV? Are we merely oxygen, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, calcium, and phosphorus with dashes of potassium, sulfur, sodium, chlorine, and magnesium, but nothing else? Are we all physical, or is there something extra-dimensional about us? Then there's a question you can't avoid if you stick around long enough. With all the wonderful things around, what's wrong? Something's off, but what is it? There's beauty in the world, but there's also the ugly, the difficult, and the tragic. Is there a cure for what's wrong? If so, what is the cure? Is it more knowledge or leisure time, money, mindfulness, more notoriety, better sitcoms, or maybe just a lot of chocolate? And then there's the painful fact that all of us die. From everything we can see, life seems destined to simply end. Not only for us, but also for the whole universe. In light of this really depressing fact, is there hope? Is there hope even beyond death? Is there a whole new reality we get to enter into where death is not a threat? Or when it's over, is it just over? All of us, in one form or another, have wondered about these kinds of things. And what's more, we've probably answered them, at least sufficiently for ourselves. Our answers to those kinds of questions collectively is called a worldview. Our worldview is our beliefs about the most important and meaningful questions of life. And our worldview guides our values, decisions, and viewpoints much more than we realize. Worldviews can be formal. The major religions have doctrinal statements designed to say, this is the answer to the questions. The lesser-known religions may not have formal statements, but they do have teachings and explanations. But it's important to note that worldviews don't have to be religious. You can have a very irreligious worldview, or a worldview that rejects organized religion's answers. Worldviews can be informal and personal. For instance, many people answer the questions by mashing up various formal systems and then customizing them to their own views. Someone might like the Christian answer to the question of who we are as human beings, the atheist answer to what the cure for the problem is, and the Hindu answer to is there hope even beyond the grave? But here's an important question. Can worldviews be true? And for that matter, can they be false? Can a worldview that I hold on the inside be false on the outside? Is my worldview accurate to what reality actually is? Are my beliefs true? Worldviews are different from one another. Really, really different. Sometimes their differences are mutually exclusive, and that leads us to a problem that's going to take some thought. What do you believe about the most important and meaningful questions of life?
All right, so hopefully you enjoyed that film, or at least even if you hated it, at least we hope it was thought-provoking. And so it's discussing the nature of belief. And here's the first question to think about and process. You can discuss it in your group if you're in a group. But let's say that a neighbor told you that last night a UFO came to their house and beamed up their dog. What would it take? What would they have to say or show you to convince you that was true? Or is there no way that that they could ever convince you? We in the studio here, we had Jimmy and Sarah, and they both pretty much said they would need photographic evidence and video evidence. I may even be harder than that because you can pretty much doctor a picture any way you want. But they both did say that there is at least one or two people in their life that if they told them, they would probably believe them, and maybe you're the same way. And that just points to the idea of how our beliefs are created and how our beliefs are formed. You know, we generally believe things that we find reasonable, that we see clear evidence of, that we experience ourselves, or someone we trust has told us that. And these beliefs that we form, they make up our worldview. And in light of that, we just want to take a couple of moments to talk about a couple of worldview points that you just kind of need to get familiar with or think about before we move into the kind of the grid that we're gonna filter all of our different worldviews through. So point number one, and it should be on the screen, is that everyone has a worldview. And you may be thinking, well, I don't have a worldview. I didn't even know what a worldview was until 1 minute ago when you said it. But when you think about the most meaningful, important questions of life, if you define a worldview that way, you do have answers to the most meaningful and important questions. We all have answers, and we just may not know it. So because worldviews can be held consistently, we can be consistent with our worldviews or inconsistent. They can be conscious or unconscious, and they can be true, partially true, or entirely false. And so we all have these worldviews, but we're often not conscious of them, and so we have to wonder why that is. And actually, all the way back in 1654, mathematician, physicist, and theologian Blaise Pascal said this, and we'll put this quote on the screen for you to think about. Again, this is 1654. Pascal said, "All of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone." And what's funny is that was written in 1654, and in my mind, in 1654, you had nothing else to do but sit in a room alone quietly. But yeah, 1654, he's writing this, that people are struggling to reflect, and of course nowadays we have all kinds of distractions that can help us keep us from that. But what's funny is 360 years later, the University of Virginia put this idea to the test. And so in 2014, researchers from the University of Virginia did this study where they invited people in, and the study was set up such that the participants would come into this room. And the room was completely empty, other than a chair. It had white walls. It was very low stimuli. They set it up that way. And so there's no chairs, there's no clock, nothing. And the idea was then to sit alone for 20 minutes with their own thoughts. That's all they had to do. But they could, if they wanted some kind of stimulation, something to do other than sit with their own thoughts, there was a button on the wall that they could push, and it would send an electric shock to them. So they would get electrocuted. And just to remove the possibility of curiosity, because just knowing myself, I would just want to push the button to see if it really did what it said it was going to do and to see how bad it hurts. But just to remove that, for people like me, they actually had everyone, before the videos or before the experiment started, they had them push the button, get shocked, and then they sort of knew what it was all about. And actually all of them, 100% said that it was super painful and they wouldn't want to do it again. But then the experiment ensued, and so 20 minutes by yourself, no one else in your room, no tech, no keys, nothing. You just have to sit and look at a wall and think. And what's actually very interesting is that, well, one, of course we know that women are smarter than men, and only 25% of women push the button, but actually 75%, 3 out of 4 men push the button just to have something to do other than sit with their own thoughts. And so the reason that I'm even bringing this up when we talk about worldview is because our worldview is often so unconscious to us that we don't even realize it, because we just don't take that time anymore to reflect. And so we hope that this will be a space that will allow you to do that. You know, maybe for the first time in a long time, to get some space to reflect on what you really believe about these important questions. And so this would be the only other question on our message board for the week. When we talk about self-reflection, when we talk about this idea, what do you think the number one barriers are for you personally, or just for our culture in general, to actually have time to reflect? So you can go to the message board and just put either what your barriers are to that kind of stuff. You know, maybe it's kids, maybe it's an iPhone, maybe it's Candy Crush. I don't know if Candy Crush is around anymore, but at one time it was a distraction for me. So you know, whatever that is, just put it on there, and we can discuss that. So that's point one, that everyone has a worldview. Point two is that every worldview is formed within this default cultural background. And what that simply means, if I'm trying to put it as simple as possible, is just that there is no neutral starting place. You don't approach a worldview on neutral ground. You come preloaded with all of this cultural baggage, all of these cultural norms, all of these things. You approach the worldview with that already in sort of your bag. And so I think that there was an author, he was really a famous author named David Foster Wallace, and in a 2005 commencement speech at Kenyon College, he told this really short parable that I think illustrates this point really well. And unfortunately, you know, David Foster Wallace was really good at sort of reading the cultural mail. Like he was really good at pinpointing all the and pointing out all the little things that made up the default background of our society. Sadly, he killed himself in 2008, just a few short years after this speech. But here's the story, and we'll put it up so you can see it as well. So he says, David Foster Wallace says, there were 2 young fish swimming along when they happened to meet a wise old fish swimming the other way. The old fish nods at the younger fish and says, "Morning, boys. How's the water?" The 2 young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and says, "What the heck is water?" And the idea that David Foster Wallace is trying to get out to us, one, is just how unconscious our worldviews are, but two, how we can be swimming in water. We could be these fish swimming in water and not even realizing we're in it. And when it comes to the sort of default cultural position, the cultural norms that we live in, that's exactly the same case, just like David Foster Wallace is pointing out, that we are swimming in some kind of water, and we need to sort of identify what is in that water, what that water is. Because again, we don't start from neutral. We don't start looking at worldviews with no pre-assumptions. And so, again, if you're in a group, and just take a few minutes and process this. If you're by yourself, again, just process this idea and think about sort of our cultural norm. As you think about society, do you think it is one right now that sort of leans itself towards belief or unbelief? Or to say another way, like I said, we don't start at neutral. So as you go into explore a worldview, to explore some truth claim, do you go in leaning towards belief or leaning towards unbelief? So just think about that just for a few minutes. Okay, moving off of the idea of worldview, we want to introduce you to the grid. That's what we're just calling it, and it's a resource. It's actually a really cool resource because when we tend to look at worldviews, it's really hard to compare apples to apples. Like if we were to look at, Buddhism and Christianity, or Islam and naturalism, it's like, how do we compare these things? Because we tend to like to grab a little bit of every one of them. But the grid is actually a way for you and for me to look, especially as we approach these questions, to look at each of these worldviews and assess them on the same level. So we can kind of figure out how they all answer the question the same way and process that. And so this is the grid. We will revisit it every week. So you will be super annoyed and tired of me talking about it by the end of these weeks. But hopefully it will be a good resource going forward for you to have in your tool bag anytime you hear things, even in culture, you can process them through this grid. So we're going to throw that on screen. And so here, the first thing is claims. When it comes to these worldview questions, for instance, when it comes to where did it all come from, every worldview makes a claim about that. And so we will identify claims of each worldview. 2 is reasons. That's exploring what are the reasons each worldview makes such a claim. And so this explores looking at the evidence, but also, we know that we don't just make claims with no backing. And so it's exploring the reasons why they do that. And then a very important one, the third one, is implications. And the reasons implications are so important is because our worldviews don't just exist, siloed by themselves, but they actually inform the way we're going to live our life. And so they have implications. The things we believe have implications to other parts of our life. So the best way to remember implications is to think if, then. If this is true, then this is true. And we'll explore that a little more here in a minute. And finally, in light of the claims, reasons, and implications, how should we live? Worldviews should inform our actions. They will either transform our heart or transform our actions. And again, if we're living unconsciously, we don't even know what they're doing. So in light of the claims, reason, and implications, how should it transform our heart? How should we live? What actions should it inspire? So now we want to sort of explore the grid. We want to give you a chance to practice it, to actually see how this plays out. And so we're going to look at a couple different things and try to put the grid into practice. So the first is, again, if you're in a group, just have someone read this aloud. If you're by yourself, you can just read it to yourself and then explore this. But we'll put it on the screen. It's 1 Corinthians 15, 12 through 14. And Corinthians was written by Paul. If you're new, if you're kind of just exploring this for the first time and not that familiar with Scripture, Paul was writing to a church in Corinth. Paul was a follower of Jesus, and he's writing one of the founders of the church, and a big part of how it spread all across the world. And so he's writing to church leaders in the city of Corinth, and he says this: "But if it is preached that Christ has been raised from the dead, how can you say, some of you say, that there is no resurrection of the dead? If there's no resurrection of the dead, then not even Christ has been raised. And if Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith." So in this church in Corinth, some people were saying, they were starting to get into these factions of saying, some were saying that there is a resurrection from the dead, some are saying, no, there's no resurrection from the dead. And then Paul comes in and says, that's one of our main claims about Jesus. So how can, how can we say there's no resurrection if Christ was resurrected? So when you look at this, which of the 4 points of the grid does this text address? Again, claims, reasons, implications, or actions. Just think about that, discuss that, process it for a minute. There may be more than one. When I look at this text, one thing I see pretty clearly is an implication. It's a claim. It's both a claim and an implication, because he's claiming that Christ raised from the dead, and then he's making an implication of the fact that if Christ was not raised from the dead, then our whole faith is useless. Our preaching is useless. So as we look at texts like this, we see both claims and implications in text. And now we're going to look at another example and run it through the grid. This is from an interview titled "Why Are We Here?" It's from a Duke University professor named Alex Rosenberg, who talks about his view. It's called scientism, but commonly could be described as naturalism, which is just the idea that science will be able to explain everything, that all there is matter and molecules and atoms, stuff like that. And so he's asked a number of these worldview questions, and then he quickly lists off his answers. And so as I read this quote, just again, listen to the claims and think through the implications and that kind of stuff. So here we go. We'll put it on the screen. So Alex has asked these questions and then really quickly shoots off all this answer. So is there a God? Of course not. What's the meaning of the universe? It doesn't have any. What is the purpose of life? Ditto. Is there a difference between right, wrong, good, and bad? There's not a moral difference between them. What is the nature of the relationship between mind and the brain? They're identical. The mind is the brain. Is there free will? Not a chance. Do the lessons of the past have any particular bearing that would come to help us cope with the future? Less and less, if they ever had anything at all. So as you look at this text, as we'll leave it up there for a minute, which of the grid topics does this quote address? You know, just like the Corinthians passage, he gives a lot of claims, but even more, he gives implications of a naturalistic worldview. It's actually one thing I can appreciate about Alex Rosenberg is that he is at least living consistently to his worldview. If you believe that there is no reason for creation, if you believe there's just all the world is an accidental, collision of matter and atoms and all of that, then he is following that to its logical end, and he's answering very truthfully for that worldview. And so, regardless of whether it's true or false, it's a great example of a person who's actually thought through the implications of their belief. Because for many of us, the way that we would hold this inconsistently is to say, that we're just, all it is a collision of matter and particles, and it's all accidental. But people have this great meaning. But there is free will. All these things, they would be inconsistent. Okay, lastly, we want to look, before we close out here, we want to do one more practice, and it's kind of also to get you familiar with the passage that we're going to use a lot over the next few weeks, and it's one of the early claims about Jesus and one of the most full. So Christianity, like all religions, isn't only a religion, it's a worldview, and they're not isolated belief statements separate from reality. They're actually claims of what reality is. And so to be viable, a worldview has to address the most meaningful and important questions of life. And if it glosses over those, if it avoids them or ignores them, it should be a red flag. And so we want to look at a verse of Scripture. And again, it's not just some nice sayings about God. It's actually informing us to the way we should view the world. And again, if you're not a Jesus follower, it at least will help you see how the earliest Jesus followers did view the world. And so what we want you to do now is if you're in a group, watching in a group, you can do this as a group exercise, or if you're by yourself, just get the text out and or after this lesson, take some time and work through this practice. But we want you to read Colossians 1, 15 through 20, and then just make a list of the claims that this text makes about reality. What truth claims is it making? And then we want to process what are the implications of these claims. So if this is true, then what does it mean? And then finally, ask yourself, if the claims are true, what actions should it inspire? And so you can just, again, pause right now and work through this. If you've printed off your participant guide, this is all in there. If not, you can just write it out somewhere else and put it in your participant guide later. But again, read Colossians 1:15 through 20, which is a very early sort of statement from the early Jesus followers about Christ and what they believed about him. And then make a list of the claims, make a list of the implications of that, and if it's true, what actions should it inspire? All right, we hope that you enjoyed the first week of Centered. Again, this was a little different. Really, for all the other weeks, we'll just be taking one of those main questions through the grid. This was to set up the whole context of the whole deal. So this will be a little different than the others. But each week we do want to end with a practice, because we need to make sure that when we think about spiritual formation and all that, we're not thinking that it's just about knowledge, attaining more knowledge about God. It involves our bodies too, practicing following Jesus. And so each week we'll have a little bit of practice or homework, and I'll put it up on the screen for you to see. It's also in your participant guide, but we'll just read through it real quick. It says, even though the quote from Blaise Pascal and the University of Virginia illustrates how hard it is to sit quietly with our own minds, both Scripture and the spiritual masters throughout history have seen quiet reflection and contemplation as vital for a follower of Jesus. And so in light of that, even if you're an explorer, find some space for self-reflection this week. Even if you only have 5 minutes, that's probably like 5 minutes more than some of us usually get. And so find 5 minutes and journal your thoughts about next week's question. You've probably thought of it before, but maybe never put words to it. But where did it all come from? How would you answer that question? And so we're going to, as you journal, ask yourself these 3 questions. 1, what do I believe about the origin of life? So that's the first. What do you believe about the origin of life? 2, how do I think the Christian worldview would answer that question? 3, what are my hang-ups or doubt about how at least how I think the Christian worldview would explain that? And then I said 3, but it's actually 4. How would or should it affect my view of the world and my actions if there really is a God that created the world and cares about people in it? And then what you can do is you can actually just offer all those up in prayer to kind of close. And so we'll see you next week, and we're excited to explore where did it all come from with you.